Good morning, everyone. We're just giving a minute or two for all the attendees to come in before we start the session. Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Soohan, and I'm the moderator for today's session, which we will cover the tech trends that are transforming PRs and communications. So a little bit of a background about myself before we start the session. So I lead marketing globally for 2C2P, a leading payments platform provider for global enterprises like Lenovo, Lazada, Changi, top fashion brands, and other tech giants that are operating across the region. So basically, we make it easy for companies to accept payments from their customers. And prior to this, I was in a crypto fintech startup, promoting financial inclusions and selling Bitcoins across the world. And before that, I was from the agency side in a global capacity, working in New York and Singapore, handling enterprise technology brands like IBM and HP. With my past experience, I'm very fortunate to be exposed to the newest tech that's applicable to all aspects of business and our lives. So today, I'm really excited about today's session because the speakers we have, they'll be covering some cutting edge tech disruptions that are changing the way we look at communications and PR. So in terms of the format wise, we will have 4 speakers this morning. And after each presentation, we will have about 10 minutes for Q&A before we move on to the next speaker. So our first speaker for today will be Kevin King. Kevin is the head of global brand reputation at MediaMonks, which is an S4 capital company. Kevin was the global practice chair of Edelman Digital for 15 years. And in addition to that, he was also in charge of Edelman Labs that's focused on innovations. He went on to co-found Low Earth Orbit in 2019, which was recently acquired by S4 Capital earlier in January. So Kevin will be kicking off today's session by sharing with us his presentations around managing brand reputation in a digital first world. This will be an insightful one as the way we operate today is constantly evolving due to the different digital channels we are exposed to. And we are really looking forward to learn about the blind spots and how to manage our brands in a digital environment. So over to you, Kevin, to walk us through.
Great. Nice to meet everyone. Wish I could see you in person. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully this goes smoothly. There we go. All right. So thank you for the introduction. Just real quick, I'm Kevin. As was mentioned, I work with MediaMonks S4 Capital. Just started there in January, so still relatively new. Before that, had a small company and was managing a lot of work with Facebook and a few other big brands at the Olympics. We were working with several beer companies and doing some work with Dole Fresh as well, or Dole Packaged Foods. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about managing brand reputation these days. It's obviously something that's changing very quickly. It's an evolving landscape, and a lot of brands I think have been playing catch up, especially during COVID times. The nature of what constitutes a brand reputation issue has changed quite a bit over the years. I think everybody on this call probably knows this, but more and more reputational issues start online. Whether it's something that's posted, whether it's kind of a slow brewing crisis. Sometimes they start very quickly. They come out of nowhere and hit brands. Sometimes it's something that's, we'll call a slow burn, something that starts off years ago and takes some years before it gets enough traction to finally start getting mainstream media coverage. Sometimes these issues are legitimate. They're serious business issues. Sometimes they're flaws in a company's business model. Sometimes it's a technology problem or something else. But increasingly, what I'm finding is these issues that are coming up are increasingly false. It's companies being accused of things that aren't necessarily accurate, or there's a piece of it that's accurate. Sorry, I had a cat jump on my desk. There's a piece of it that's accurate, or not all of it. So, brands trying to combat false information is increasingly something that's happening. I break it off into kind of 6 categories of issues that brands are facing right now. There's sort of the moment in time crises. And I think this is the type of thing that most brands are accustomed to dealing with. That is, this example that I have in the picture is Dr. Daryl. It was the gentleman that was kicked off the United Airlines flight in Chicago. I should say dragged off the United Airlines flight in Chicago. Something that comes very quickly, gets immediate, social and media coverage, and something that, I think falls in that category of a more sort of traditional crisis. What I am seeing a lot is a lot of brands that I call sort of service impacted brands. In my life, I kind of break companies into 2 categories. I call them service impacted and non-service impacted. So a traditional CPG company is kind of a non-service impacted brand. While they have issues that come up from time to time, it's not something that dominates them on a day-to-day basis. If you are a airline, a hospitality chain, a restaurant chain, a cable company, a telecommunications firm, you have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of customer interactions a day that are playing out in digital and social. And that has a cumulative effect on your brand reputation. If your customer service is breaking down, your brand reputation is going to start to break down. So those 2 things are becoming more integral. Technology challenges, that's pretty obvious, especially for sort of tech-enabled companies. If they have a lot of outages or a lot of downtime, customers obviously sour and it causes sort of brand crisis. Employee communities, increasingly employees are more vocal about the companies that they work for, and that is spilling into social. So, a good example of that right now is Amazon. At least in the United States, and I know in other parts in the world, they're fighting a serious issue with their employees over unionization. And it's something that has spilled into the online environment, and it is absolutely affecting brand reputation. Politics is another one. When different governments and politicians in different governments sort of target a specific industry or have an issue with a specific industry, that can cause a lot of problems for brands. In sort of the populist movement that's occurred in much of the world in the last 5 or 6 years or so, seeing this increasingly where brands are actually at war with local and federal governments. And then the last one is sort of these conspiracies. This kind of falls into the more of the false accusation category that I was talking about. That's where brands are having to deal with things that they never would have predicted in a million years. The example I have up here is Wayfair. If anybody is familiar with this issue they had to deal with last year, which was they had cabinets that were named after, they used female names, and they were expensive because they're industrial cabinets. And they got accused of kind of a conspiracy theory that they were shipping children in the cabinets and selling them off into sort of a slave trade type of thing. Completely false accusation, but it went completely wildfire. There were calls for boycotts, everything else. So these are kind of the 6 categories that I see things brewing. The reason I call this out is I think that most brands right now are good at dealing with the moment in time issues. They've got sort of their government and public affairs that deal with the political side. But when it comes to customer service, IT, and employee relations, haven't so much connected that to corporate comms and reputation management yet. Need to be more hand in hand with their colleagues and dealing with that. And then the conspiracy thing is something that is cropping up quite a bit lately. The quicker you catch an issue, the more proactive your response. So, sounds pretty obvious, but by the time most brands catch an issue, they've already been sort of tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. So the faster that you can catch it, the better. Most brand monitoring right now, and we're going to talk about a lot of different technologies today, it's only skimming the surface, and it usually only identifies an issue after it's already escalated. So in most cases, by the time a brand's seeing it, it's too late. I just put this chart here for those of you in the PR comms industry. When brands are doing, and every brand I think these days at least is doing social media monitoring and paying attention to what's being said. The reality is that social media monitoring usually only covers Facebook, and that's public Facebook, not even private Facebook. They're looking at YouTube, they're looking at Twitter, and they're looking at Instagram. And that's what's coming out in their social reports in most cases. And that's what they're making a lot of decisions based on the data. The reality is that the bulk of the conversations are starting in these other channels, which are either hard to monitor or brands just aren't monitoring them. So I can tell you right now that Discord is a particular thorn in my side right now in a number of different brands. A lot of the negativity towards brands starts there. It gets amplified through other channels, but whether it's Facebook groups, increasingly TikTok, whether it's happening through a Telegram or a WhatsApp, and obviously Reddit, there's been a lot of discussion on that in the last year. A lot of that's happening below the water level. Brands aren't necessarily seeing it until it percolates up to Twitter. And by the time they see it on Twitter, it's usually too late to get out in front of the issue. The quicker you can catch it, if you can catch an issue at inception, the better. I mentioned Discord before. So, I'll use Discord as a specific example right now. So you take something like the Wall Street Bets community. Wall Street Bets has been written about endlessly this year and the impact that it's had on the financial system. But almost all of that has been associated with the Reddit community. I have found in a number of brands that we work with that the original sort of theories or conversations start on Discord. They then spill into Reddit, where they get amplified or de-amplified based on whether the community thinks it's important or not. And then it spills into Twitter, Facebook, and traditional media, right? So most brands are right now all the way at the far right or left, depending on how you're looking at your screen. They're not seeing it until it hits Twitter. They're not seeing it when it's starting to percolate in Discord. And brands really need to start paying attention at the closer end to that funnel. The way to do that is being a part of the actual community. So as I said, some of the technologies, and I think Daryl and some others are going to talk to you about some specific technologies, they're hard to actually monitor some of those communities. They're either closed. So brands need to actually be a part of that community. And what that requires is having a behavioral strategy versus just a monitoring strategy. So you have to monitor customer behaviors as much as you're actually monitoring what's being said. And the example I always use, this is an old one, and I hope this isn't too American of an example, but if you were to pour a word cloud, if you were a music producer and you were pulling a word cloud to figure out why Rick Astley's songs keep selling, you'd get kind of the word cloud, and you'd kind of get a monitoring report over the number of video views and the number of shares and the top keywords, but you wouldn't have any context as to the meme situation that's going on. You'd only understand the meme situation if you had somebody that was engaged with those communities and seeing it. So the data would only tell a portion of the story. It would tell the story of its popularity. It would tell the story of the number of shares. It would tell the story, but it wouldn't actually tell the meme story. So the way to do this is brands need to start aligning their monitoring and tactics to customer behaviors. So the way that I've been encouraging the teams that I work with, and this was both at a previous life and in my current life, is to start really developing a communication strategy, not based off of specific platforms, but how people are actually absorbing information. So again, this is kind of a broad generalization, but I categorize this in 6 categories. And people can fall into multiple categories. I should mention that in advance. So people that rely on professionally distributed information. That is like your traditional news services, news wires, news organizations. It's professionally edited content. It's people that are getting information that has been edited. The way that you engage on that is kind of through your traditional media relations. You've got increasingly people who are self-selecting the content that they see. So that is people who are choosing to become parts of groups of like-minded people. They're the hardest to break through to. Right now, probably the most effective way to reach them is through sort of paid targeted media, which I am a strong believer that communications people need to embrace to get messages out. But those self-selected groups are hard to infiltrate, would be the right way to say it. You've got community inspired. Reddit's the best example of that, but you can also, depending on how people sort through trends and things on Twitter, they kind of see what bubbles up to the top. They see what's the most popular, and based on what the community decides is most popular is what they'll pay attention to the most. You've got people who corporate informed, and this varies by industry. People that rely on the actual businesses for information. If you're in financial services or pharmaceuticals, people are much more trusting of those, not necessarily trusting, but they do use those companies as sources of information. So obviously your brand website, your blog, your CEO communications is completely important. Everyone's talked about the rise of influencer the last, really the last 10 years or so. But influencer created content is important as well. And then the last one I would have is institutionally mandated. That's not just government. That could be a religious organization. That is people that are doing what they're told to. So if your local church tells you to boycott a product at Walmart, they will boycott it because it was something that was mandated by an institution. Again, engaging with those institutions is key, but it's not just, point here is it's not just monitoring to see what people are saying. It's monitoring their behaviors and seeing in each one of these groups what's happening so you can make tactical communications decisions appropriately. I think that wraps up my 12 minutes. I apologize.
Thank you, Kevin, for your presentation. So we open up to the floor for questions, and I think we have one question coming through. So the question from the attendee would be, we've come a long way in terms of how we manage corporate brands and companies' reputation, right? But the reality seems to have outpaced that evolution. So the question is, what are the 3 things would you say that corporate communicators can do to catch up?
Yeah, I think it's really, going back 10 years, it was really kind of a struggle to pull brands into kind of this social monitoring space, right? They were doing traditional media monitoring, but they were doing social monitoring. I think the good news is that everybody's at least paying attention to what's being said online. They're making decisions based on that. The piece that I think is still lacking is brands actually becoming part of the communities. And when I say that, I don't even mean necessarily engaging with the communities, but living and breathing in the communities. So right now, if you're in communications and you work for a financial services company, if you're not living and breathing in the Wall Street Bets communities, either on Discord or Reddit, you're gonna miss a lot of stuff. You gotta understand the context, the nuances, the public mentality. So the more the communications professionals can either have themselves or people that work for them embedded in those communities to understand what's happening, the better. So the technology will get you so far, but it won't get you the context. So really becoming a part of those communities and understanding what's being said on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. And I think from a question from myself as well. So I guess it really boils down to what you shared in one of your slides where you mentioned to look at the customer journey itself, right? In terms of where they live, because not all brands community or customers resides in Discord, for example. Not all brands sort of customer resides in Reddit, for example, as well, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I think Daryl will talk a little bit about it. Some of those communities are hard to monitor through technology, right? So you have to kind of go a little old school manual, and actually sort of live in those communities and understand, like I said, those nuances in those communities. Because increasingly what I'm finding is by the time you recognize an issue on Twitter, it has probably been out there in some of those more niche message boards for several weeks, if not months, if not years. So that by the time it gets amplified onto like a Twitter, it's something it's a train barreling down the tracks at that point. It's not something that's just getting started.
Yeah. And I guess another question that we have is basically, so would you say in terms of the talent or resources you hire because of the evolution of the different channels, like you mentioned, the below the water level, I guess the people you hire would sort of evolve because they need to be in touch with all those different channels. They are so-called non-traditional, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, there's definitely, I'm obviously, I'm older, right? So, it's hard to understand for me in particular. I mentioned Wall Street Bets, like I can actually kind of live and breathe in that community and understand it pretty well, but I'm not going to lie and say I understand all the nuances in the TikTok community, right? So having people that natively understand how some of those communities work, and can really interpret the difference between sarcasm and reality is of utmost importance, because the data will tell you kind of the wrong story some cases. You've got to understand the motivations and the things behind it. And only somebody that's a part of that community is really going to be able to explain that to you.
Great. And I think we have one more question from the floor. And I believe we have enabled the attendee to speak, to ask the question. M. Low, I believe.
Maybe muted.
Yes, we have another one from, okay. Yep.
Hello, I'm Janina. I work for Horizon Quantum Computing, and I have a question regarding the role of leader of the company. So, how do you articulate it between the voice of the brand and the voice of the leaders of the company?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's important that you have a communication strategy for both. If I'm understanding your question correctly, it's how you balance between the leader's sort of social presence and the brand's social presence. So you've got to have a purpose for each one. When those two things are too intertwined, that can be bad, right? So especially if there's, any company's going to have turnover, executives are going to leave, you're going to have new people come in. You want to make sure that you define a specific role for the executives in social versus the brand, and make sure they're sort of playing off each other and complementary of each other. So there's things that you might want to executively address that the brand doesn't want to address, and vice versa. But having a clearly defined strategy of how you balance those two things is really important. Otherwise, I've seen cases where, a CEO and a brand will literally trip over each other. They'll even, counter each other sometimes in the social environment, right? They'll literally say opposite things sometimes. So making sure that you've got that coordination and making sure which avenue is best for to communicate what message, and knowing that ahead of time is really important, especially in a crisis. That's where things start to trip over. Is executives are often eager to like get out in front of something and say something, and sometimes move a little bit too fast and get out ahead of what the brand is actually able to say. So just making sure that coordination happens is of utmost importance.
Maybe you have some examples of to do and not to do in terms of this articulation, and then when you had leaders of the company who would respond to a crisis situation.
Yeah, I don't want to get into any specific examples, because I just don't want to like cite any specific individual, especially that I work with. But I do, like I said, I do see a lot of cases where the CEOs want to communicate. They want to defend themselves in a lot of cases, right? So when something happens, especially in a crisis, it's a person's natural instinct to take it personally, right? So an individual is usually getting, hammered in Twitter. They're getting negative messages. They're getting horrible stuff written about them. They want to get out there and defend themselves. And until you have all your facts straight and all your communications objectives aligned, that can just get you in deeper trouble sometimes. So just making sure that the executives don't get too far out ahead of the brand strategy, and make sure those two things are working off each other.
So I think we have time for one more questions. And if there's any other questions, we can address that at the end of the session if you have time. So last question would be, marketing comms, corporate comms, and PR have always been separate in terms of function. So do you think there's a need to consolidate? Yeah.
I do, and I'd actually so consolidate in terms of the department is, you know, it's obviously there's separate objectives for each one, right? So some autonomy makes sense, but they've got to work closer together because again, I could give you a million examples where, you know, an airline is having a crisis and the marketing department is still in the middle of the crisis while things are, you know, going horribly, horribly wrong. They're running ads targeting people with, you know, $89 airfare round trip from blah, blah, blah. You know, and it just kind of digs themselves into a bigger hole. So that coordination between marketing and comms is important. The piece that I really wanted to stress and what I said up front is it's not just marketing and communications, it's also IT and customer service as well. Customer service is increasingly the part of the businesses that I see having the biggest impact on brand reputation. So if you're a company, you could do the greatest, you know, environmental efforts and you could be doing all kinds of positive things for, you know, whether it's the environment or your employees and everything else. But if you've got a terrible customer service department and those 10,000, 100,000 things are brewing every day, it's going to undermine everything that you do. So, you know, customer service, I think, gets overlooked by communications in a lot of cases, that if you don't have your customer service operation in order, it's going to undermine your communications efforts dramatically. So I would take your question a bit. It's not just consolidation, it's coordination with marketing, comms, IT, and customer service is really essential.
Thank you, Kevin. All right. Thank you for your time, Kevin. And I think now we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Daryl Ho. So Daryl is the MD of We Communications Singapore. Prior to that, he spearheaded the growth at Adamant's Singapore operations as the Managing Director of Digital, where he introduced a data-led predictive intelligence approach to integrated communications and marketing. He has over 20 years of experience and has supported numerous global organizations such as Philips Healthcare, Singtel, and also the Singapore government in their push to transform through technology on their journey to be more customer-centric. So for today, Daryl will take us through his presentation on how we can use data and AI to communicate and tell our stories better. So over to you, Daryl, to take us.
Thanks, Soohan. Can you hear me and can you see the screen?
Yes, we can hear you well. Your screen is black at the moment.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Hang on. Can you see this now?
No.
Is it moving?
No, I think I can try to.
What about now?
No, nothing on your screen.
Okay, give me a minute. With all the technology in the world, you would expect this would be easier. Can you see the screen now?
Oh no, it's still empty, Daryl.
Oh, it's real weird, isn't it? My apologies for the technical error, guys. About now?
Okay, I think we're still having technical issues. Let us see if he does. Okay. Tara have your slides?
No, I think you have the slides. I can.
Give me a second. Let me create out. Okay, let me try to share the screen. All right.
Right. Sorry for that. There was a little bit of a technical error. You guys don't mind. Right. I think we can maybe just move the bar on the right out, and then let's go. Okay. Thank you, guys. Good morning, and thank you for again spending some time with us this morning. I think one thing is clear from what Kevin said. I think there's a lot going on in the space today. Today I really want to talk to you about a few things, primarily around data and how that's going to affect, or how it's affecting you already, right? I think there's one thing that's quite clear from everything that's happened around us in the last 1 year, is that some of us probably came into this realizing that we didn't see it coming. Some of us are already there and said, well, we're already doing all this transformation that's happening with, Zoom calls and so on and so forth, and working virtually. And then the other one, some of us just completely were already, already entrenched in it. And you were saying, what's next? But I think one thing is clear. Next slide, please. I think one thing is clear when you look at it is that we are all, I like this image. One thing is clear, that we're all in the same storm, but we're not necessarily in the same boat. Incidentally, those of you that were on Twitter, this, there was a poem that was created by a user just about when COVID hit, depicting the fact that some of us had bigger boats and some of us had smaller boats, and some of us were struggling and some of us weren't, right? And I guess that's also the question for a lot of you, right? Where are you doing and how are you doing today, right? Because a lot of that is where we look at what's happening today and we're saying, okay, where is the world going, all right? But one thing is clear as we look at, COVID 1 year on right now. Next slide, please, Soohan. Is that the world is rapidly changing, right? And I think none of us on this call would disagree with that, right? I think today, if you're on the agency side or if you're on the brand side, you've realized that either your scope has increased or your work has just thrown you so many jargons and names and this, that you're like, okay, what are all these fancy little things today, right? Next slide. And we also realized that jobs are evolving. So this was interesting. I actually presented this just before COVID, and one of the big markers for how the work in the world and how people getting into the workforce and the skills that they need are going to evolve will dramatically change in 2020. There isn't a new stat for this right now, but I dare stick a dollar on it and say the fact that mobile and marketing automation were key back in 2020 is not true anymore today. I'm pretty sure it's a lot more complex than that today. But it's again a question, right? What are you equipping yourself with in terms of skills, both for your brand and for yourself, to be able to do this well and be future-proof for what's coming your way, or what's already here today, right? Next slide. And in that sense, we've looked at this before, right? We've said this before, the lines are blurred. Somebody asked the question earlier, right? Marketing, communications, PR, comms, should that all be combined or not? I think one thing is absolutely clear. It's that there is less of a divide today and there's more of a collaboration needed. And I think we can all agree. But how do you collaborate, right? Is it just simply putting people together, or is it more than that, right? There's a lot more to this, but there's also technology. How does that play a part in this? How does data play a part in this? And today I really want to, challenge you and give you a few thoughts around, share some observations with you on where the market's going as well. Next slide. And agents and, my apologies, I missed out putting agencies and brands, haven't really figured it out yet. And I think we're all finding our way around this. And I like this saying from Kate Newman, who was the global CEO at Leo Burnett a couple of years ago. And she said, well, we all have to figure it out, right? And we have to, at the heart of what we're trying to do, regardless whether you're on the brand side or whether you're on the agency side, is the fact that you're trying to solve business problems. And the more we can get into that mind space, the easier I would say it will be for us to overcome challenges, because there will be less of a divide and conquer. And there'll be less of okay, if I have a problem, I go direct to building a social media campaign. If I have a problem, I go to PR, right? There's a lot of less of that, as opposed to a lot of that right now happening today. So, I think a lot of us have to start with that first. How do we shift the mindsets, and how do we also then embrace technology? And I'll share a little bit of thoughts with you in a while. Next slide. And interestingly, one of the, ever since we've been out of lockdown for the last 6 months, been having coffee chats with a bunch of people, and one interesting major publisher and I can't name names right now because obviously for them it's a bit of a difficult season, and they were saying to me, it's crazy. Even the news networks, even the media channels that we all have grown accustomed to, right? And those of you that are communication professionals on the call today, you realize that, your media relationships are great, right? But even they are facing challenges today, right? How are they, embracing this new normal, right? And, how has technology creeped in and changed what their unique sort of viewpoint on the world and on the stories are? That middle portion, it's a video. If I had it on slide, it would play, but it's on PDF, so you wouldn't see it. But those of you that know, our dear friends in China have an AI-driven news anchor today. So a lot of them are gonna, are fearing that, what's next, right? Where is all this going if a robot can take over my job, right? And I think it's interesting because when you look at it, you also challenge the fact that the moment technology creeps in, there is a need to shift mindsets and to shift models, right? We have to shift models and shift business models as well. Those of you that also know Channel News Asia, right? Here in homegrown Singapore, right? Shifted majority of their programming online, right? Today, I think a lot of the programming is for YouTube as opposed to broadcast. So how does that impact you as a brand? How does that impact you as a communications professional when you're thinking about, how do you plan for visibility around the brand? Because, planning for programming and getting insertions into programming online is very different from broadcast, right? So how does that work for you? But that's it, next slide, please. You might be asking, what does this all mean, Daryl? So I want to share a couple observations with you today. So humor me for the next, 5 minutes or so. But I want to share some points of view on hopefully practical areas where you can look at if you're not already doing it, and what you can already jump in and understand and maybe approach, maybe dig and research into it yourself as well. Or if you're working with an agency, ask them about it as well, right? So next slide, please. So the first thing is one of the things that I always tell a lot of leaders in organizations that I meet and a lot of brands, right? Today, there's a need to be always on and always ready. I think the way that we used to run businesses and the way that we used to market businesses, and Kevin brought it up earlier, you can have the best and the most brilliant approach and the most brilliant CEO, but if you've got 40,000, customer service requests coming in 24 hours a day and that's not being solved, then you've got a problem. We need to fix that. How do we fix that? And so that's, I think we've all now gotten used to that always on as well, but how do we get always ready? Right? Because that's also the other dichotomy that you need to deal with, because we've not had processes that allow us to be always ready. So when you talk about managing brand reputation, there's also about marketing and models around that. How do you make sure that you're always constantly engaging the customer, right? And some of that will come with technology. You've got to embrace it. And one way I want to think, I want to encourage all of you on this call is to look at it in the next slide, right? One way of looking at this, Soohan, next slide. One way of looking at this is to, especially if you're a communications specialist, is to look at it this way, right? How are you thinking like a journalist, but operating like a digital publisher? I think the fact that you see BBC go online 100% now, the fact that you see the Independent online, you see that YouTube, Channel News Asia is on YouTube majority of the time. You see that Vice Media, a lot of you probably know what Vice is, right? They've done a great job on making sure that the news and the stories get out. How do you operate like a digital publisher, right? As opposed to just, putting content out whenever you feel like it. And I think this fundamentally changes the processes, but also changes the way in which you operate, because there's a lot of human capital involved, but also a lot of what technology brings that you can be efficient with. And there's also cost that you need to think about, right? Because then do people get access to content newsrooms? Do you get content marketers? How do you then be quick and efficient with content? Something, if a piece of news broke on Monday, how do you make sure that that's out by Wednesday and not out the following Monday because it's old news a week later, right? So, I want to encourage you, maybe one of the first things you start looking is, how do you really build a model around operating like a digital publisher? Because that's a whole different world. The next slide. The next insight I want to give you is see around the corner. One of the things that we look at, and personally is a sort of passion project for me and the agents and at We Communications at the agency that I'm running, we're going through is we're looking at how AI, artificial intelligence, is impacting the way we're doing and changing our value proposition to customers, but also how that's evolving the world, right? How is that giving our clients and the brands the ability to do what we call see around the corner, right? Those of you that know, and I'm not going to make an assumption that all of you understand this, but a lot of you understand that there is a lot of data that sits in the internet. The question today is, what about the data that sits in the internet that isn't connected? Because all of it is not connected. So those of you that don't know, Facebook doesn't talk to Google, Google doesn't talk to Instagram, and they don't talk to all the media publishers. There's no content. None of that is connected. So how do you get a proper view, right? And so what we always say is that there's a difference between what people say they would do versus what people actually do. And Kevin talked a little bit about it, right? You need to understand behaviors. And that's what we're saying. There's a lot of behavior, especially coming out of COVID, because the world has just gone online. So how do you harness that? How do you take that and make that useful for you, where you're actually understanding that the same person that bought, and the example I always give is the same person could have, there could be two different people having newborns at the same time. One is a 24-year-old newlywed person that just had a baby. Another could be a person in their late 30s, early 40s that just had his first baby. But the difference, that there is no difference in their behavior patterns, because both of them are going to look for the cheapest and the most effective diaper, for example, right? Does it make sense that you're still targeting based on age? Probably not. So you probably have to ask yourself, what are you looking at from a behavioral standpoint, and do you have the data to be able to support that, right? As opposed to if you put people in a primary and secondary research and you ask them what they would do, they will naturally tell you what they would do. But when they leave the room, there's a whole different world that they live in, right? So, there's a lot of that going on. So how do you get that going today? And how do you embrace some of that technology to be able to inform the content, but inform your strategy as you move forward as well? Next slide, please. Now, one of that is, we also talked about this a bit earlier, but I want to touch about measuring up to the moment. So this is more specific for communications professionals and marketing folks. One of the big challenges for you today is, how do you look at measuring to the moment? And we're talking about in real time. The technology exists, the data exists for you to be able to flip up the phone, flip up your dashboard and say, I want to understand where my impact is today. And part of that means that you need to have that connectivity across the data silos. And we're talking about connectivity, not just by plugging in a few pipes and APIs and understanding, oh, okay, all of that gets into a dashboard. But we're talking about connectivity in the fact that the data actually correlates. So if somebody went on Lazada and bought a red pair of shoes, they also went and booked Godzilla versus Kong. And that happened, right? So you would put out an image of Godzilla wearing a red pair of shoes, and you probably sell 1 million of them, right? So that's the connectiveness that you need. And that's the way that you should look at it from a real-time perspective. So, we've had, in some of my conversations with clients, we're still using old school media monitoring, for example. How do we evolve that product? How do we move that into a real-time space where it's actionable and you can test and learn as well? Next slide. Now, that also has evolved. If those of you that understand artificial intelligence and AI, a lot of that technology exists today where we're saying goodbye to Boolean. So again, if you spend some time tweaking and playing around with some of the technology and the monitoring tools out there, a lot of them are Boolean based. And today, what they cannot do, AI can. And it's interesting. And so with technologies like OpenAI and GPT-3 and so on and so forth, you're able to now embrace the meaning and the application of what something is happening online. For example, in the slide, and it might be a bit blur for you, is the difference in the bottom two examples is when Apple has a piece of news that come out, you could actually tag that's Apple, the Apple I want, which is the Apple handphone and the global mobile brand. But if somebody has an article about an Apple, then that's not the article that I want, because that's about the fruit, right? So now if you did Boolean, you wouldn't be able to do that. That complexity around making sure that you're not just using, and you have that cultural diversity and that application and that nuancing is where AI comes in really powerful. And if you don't know of the platforms, feel free to reach out. There are a ton of platforms out there right now. They are in test phase, and they're absolutely exceptional, right? Because this allows you to not just be real time, but also add that contextual meaning into it. Because that's when you get a lot smarter more efficient. So, I think in the way forward in 12 months, we're going to say goodbye to Boolean as much as we can. And I'm pretty sure a majority of the platforms are going to shift to this as soon as they can, right? So next slide, please. Now, what does this mean for you? This means that if you're a brand or if you're an agency, one of the things that I want to encourage you to think about is how do you build what I call new world, new teams, okay? And these are a combination of teams where you have to actively go out and find hybrid skills. You have to be looking for people that want to have hybrid skills. I think we live in a world where because of the connectivity today, we can't just be a great master of one thing. We've got to be a master of a few things today. And with technology, that's completely doable. So one of the things that we do internally, for example, is we give clients access to a brilliant content newsroom that's a mix of these new teams, right? Where you've got a whole bunch of strategists, but planners, but also data analytics and creative people, not just sitting together, but each of them can do multiple things, right? So, one example is we had, a producer that can also do data analytics, right? And that's really powerful because then they know how to use their skills for video marketing, for example. So one of the things that you need to look at, and when you're looking at embracing this, is how do you really build that new world, new teams, hybrid skills, evolve the ways of working, but also embrace the tools and the technology. Next slide, please. And the last thing I would say is PR and communications and marketing used to be a lot about storytelling. I always say this, and I want to encourage you as well. Distribution is king. It's also king today. Beyond the storytelling is the ability to tell the story in 300 different formats, making sure that it gets into 3,000 different locations. Now, I think we have to look at it from that perspective, right? So it's not just about storytelling. And, one thing that we embrace internally, and I want to encourage all of you as well, is how do you get into that learn, unlearn, and relearn mode? Because that's hugely important, right? As we go in and as technology starts to move so quickly, there is a need to just keep learning that because it's moving too fast. We can't catch up anymore, right? So there is that constant evolution and that constant optimization of your strategy as well. So while you're looking at all this regular content and channels and timing, make sure that you're also constantly relearning and unlearning what you thought was possible and making sure that you're optimizing as well. Next slide. So at the end of the day, this is my last slide, second last slide actually. Those of you that know Alvin Toffler, if you don't, Google him, right? I want to encourage you not to be left behind. There's a lot happening. We've got 10 minutes, so hopefully you had a bit of a flavor of where this is going. But at the end of the day, don't get left behind. Embrace technology. Next slide. Embrace technology, but also beyond that, understand it and learn to master it, because the robots indeed are coming, and there's nothing artificial about the innovation, but it also requires a handshake with a human person, and that human person is yourself. So there's a lot going on in the data and AI world. I want to end it there and open it up for questions as well. Soohan, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Daryl. I was about to say I'm going to do a little switch around because we are a little bit pressed for time. So we'll address the question at back. So for now, we'll jump on to the next speaker first, who is Manisha from Karo. So Manisha is the Group Chief Marketing Officer at Karo, which is Southeast Asia's largest automotive marketplace. Prior to Karo, she was the head of marketing at Tokyo Marine Life Insurance Singapore. And she has led several Singapore's first technological innovations. She's listed as one of the world's 100 most influential CMOs and also the top 50 women leader in Asia. So what she'll share today is really, really cool. It's about disrupting and shattering the usual habits of car buying behavior in today's digital world. So I'm really excited to pass the virtual mic over to Manisha to take us through her presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Thank you. All right, Soohan, thank you so much, Soohan. And sorry I had to crash a little bit and take over the slot because I really have to rush for another meeting, and I know we are so pressed for time. So I will try to stick to my 10 minutes and I hope I can finish up in 8 so we can have some questions. So I'll be sharing with you something very cool that is going on in the automotive space. And I think regardless of where people are, like in whichever part of the world that they're in, they would understand how the car buying and selling behavior works, right? Because it hasn't really changed pretty much for decades now. So just one second. Just move this away. So the problem with the industry is something that I want to start with. Buying and selling of cars has always been a very high touch industry, right? And it has so much distrust at all levels. I mean, you have friends who probably get a good deal on a car and then you walk away thinking, I think I got this was too good a deal. Did I just get cheated? And if you did not get a good deal, then there's always this buyer's remorse, like, oh my God, I think I overpaid. Or if you overpay, then you're probably always looking out whether you can probably change the car. But there's always this feeling that is always nagging you because it's a very expensive product and you can't just change your mind the way you can when it comes to smaller items like maybe Kia, maybe buying clothes at Zara. You can still return it as long as the price tag is there. So moving on. So when COVID happened, it really shook things up globally for pretty much all of the automotive players. And it doesn't mean us, it actually means more for the traditional car dealers who have been used to buying and selling cars the same old-fashioned way for decades now. So since showrooms were closed globally and also in Singapore, showrooms were closed, test drives were not allowed. What started happening is people had this inventory of cars that was just depreciating month after month, month after month. And the longer the car sits there, the older it's getting. Like in Singapore, there's a linear, we have a COE system, which means you can only drive a car with the certificate for years. And after 10 years, no matter which car, it will just linearly depreciate. Even if it just depreciates. So the value is always going down. Right, so COVID made in this industry. Closer to home in Singapore, we saw there was news of vehicle sales dropping, which is like a lockdown that we had in Singapore. We had the overall trade was bracing itself for a massive hit, in the industry, and people then suddenly realized that, hey, if you continue doing things the same way, which means expecting customers to bring their whole family, because car buying is a bit like a picnic, right? In the past, you bring your whole family, you bring your parents, you bring your kids, everybody comes in, you go to a nice car showroom, you'll probably enjoy some food, drinks that's given to you. Maybe the kids will get a balloon. You all go for a test drive together. Maybe see if the stroller fits. So the family would participate in the buying of car. But because of COVID, it became actually just as few people as possible. And ideally, if only one person can come and experience the car, that is best because we prioritize safety. So we realized actually COVID is not a bad thing. It was a great opportunity, especially for tech companies like ours who can quickly rethink the entire process. So what we did is we looked at the entire customer journey and we said, hey, if you buy and sell cars, let's challenge ourselves. Let's see whether people can buy and sell cars without physically meeting a person and keep things virtual. And that's where not only the PR opportunity came, because the brand could be built around the whole tech automotive space and be the market leader, but also it was a real genuine problem that had to be solved for the customers, and it was prioritizing safety. So when COVID hit and showrooms were closed, something interesting that we did was we quickly went to change the entire customer journey. So you start from browsing the cars online, which you could do in the past, but you could actually make appointments. And when you made an appointment, we were asked to come down to where the cars are parked. So all the cars are parked on large, centrally located. And you would receive an OTP in which you can then key into the lock, which gives you access to the keys. Now, if you have a good credit scoring, we would have already cleared your financing and insurance beforehand. What that means is when you come to see the car, you can turn on the car, you can kick the tires, you can smell the leather, you can see whether the aircon is functioning or not. And you could even do a live chat 24/7 with any of our customer service. Every car was sanitized, of course, after each customer viewed it. But back to our point, if your credit scoring is good, we actually digitize end-to-end financing and insurance. And what that meant was you could technically drive off the car for 3 days test drive. And this is, again, something unheard of. And it was very interesting and, again, PR worthy, because while putting the customers first and their safety first, we retweaked the entire customer experience and the journey to be very different from the traditional way of doing things. And that's where we really started seeing a growth in the market. Now, so we launched Singapore's very first contactless car purchase service, which means you could do everything end to end. And we started getting a lot of inquiries from customers because either their car needed to be changed because their car was now being overutilized because they don't want kids to take the school bus anymore. They wanted the kids to be ferried to be sent to school, or their car was underutilized. So either people were upgrading or they were downgrading because they're working from home. The car is just sitting there. They don't see the need for having a big car or even a car to begin with. So we started having a lot of these interesting conversations with our customers, and we use our platform to help them make the switch. And by keeping everything end-to-end online, we actually won the customer's heart. And then once the circuit breaker, the lockdown sort of opened up into phase one, we saw an opportunity that, hey, why don't we try doing something different? Right? Why don't we, since we already have so much interest coming in from customers who want to view the car digitally and remotely, why don't we work together with an influencer and ride on an existing wave? So what we did is we looked at the Singles Day. This is purely an experiment. Singles Day, the 11/11 sale, and we worked with partnered with Gush Cloud, and we worked with the influencers to really talk about the proposition of not only showing 5 cars during 1.5 hour session, but we were talking about how, if you come and see the car, you can do a QR code to see the health report of the car, stuff that is unheard of. You can test drive for 3 days, again, unheard of propositions. And it was a great way to educate people about what is the new experience post-COVID looks like, which is low touch, low commitment. So it's absolutely opposite of the traditional way. And it is something that allows you to change your mind. And we were very encouraged because within 85 minutes, we actually sold the car that you see at the back. That car was sold during the Facebook live streaming. Now, the person placed an interest and said he wants to view the car. We could have sold it that very night, but the program started at 10 p.m., ended at 11:30 at night. So the person came the following day, still looked at the car, test drove it himself, did the virtual call, and the car was bought. And we feel that this is the way forward for most traditional businesses, especially if it's a high involvement category like cars. We do feel that more and more people would want to go and buy cars online. Be it through live streaming, be it through virtual call, be it through a car that's just delivered at your doorstep for you to test drive for 3 days. But the future is no longer about having that brick and mortar shops that are very restrictive, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. only on weekends. But it's more of bringing the car to the customer rather than us. In the past, the customer would bring the entire family over. So we are seeing this to be a very, very interesting space, and let's see sort of where this goes. So again, back to Carrot, what we're doing now, we've actually pivoted the business quite nicely, and we just closed our financial year end of March. And year on year, the business has grown about 2.5x despite COVID. And that really shows that by putting the customers first and by really placing their trust ahead of everything that we do, be it for communication, what we show, going the extra mile of doing inspection for the car, showing them the health report of the car, does not only provide is a new way of buying and selling cars, but also builds trust around the brand. And that's why this is like a new PR trend that we see will be growing more and more, because for the whole world to be vaccinated, it's going to take 7 years. And I think by then, consumer habits would have changed. So yeah, that pretty much brings me to the end of the presentation. And I welcome questions, please.
Okay, I believe we have a question from the floor. Kiri, I think you're mute, if I'm not wrong.
There's some technical glitch.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? Okay, yes, no. So I guess I have one for you, Manisha, before you go. So,
Okay.
so I'm wondering, so what comes after next? Since you managed to sell a car in 85 minutes, are we looking forward to see any more innovation stuff or cool stuff you're going to attempt upcoming?
We're always doing new cool stuff. So the next thing that we are working quite closely on is behavioral insurance, which means during the COVID time, right, we partnered with NTUC Income to come up with pay as you drive. So it was again Singapore's very first pay as you drive insurance, because we realized either people are, like I said, not driving or they're driving more. So people who were not driving, they want to only pay if they are driving, not a blanket insurance premium. But now we want to push the needle to say, if you are a safe driver, Soohan, compared to me, I am not a very safe driver. I can be honest about that. Your premium should be lower than mine. And that is based on behavioral. So it's no longer about just how much you drive, but also how safely you drive. And we see a big market in here especially for Southeast Asia, starting with Indonesia, because not only are the cars, are the roads very unsafe, but also the population is huge in terms of collecting that data on really using it to reward safe drivers. And most of our customers are families with young, and we believe that given this profile, it is the right product to reward further and really lower their cost of car ownership. So that's next.
Great. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm the pay as you drive kind of driver, so perfect.
Nice, you're on trend, man.
So let me see if there's any other questions. If not, there's one more. So I think there's a question from Flo about what's your take on merging effectively between traditional and digital approach?
Right. So it is easier said than done. I'll be very honest, because even though people have the COVID, fear, and people don't want to go out that much, the fact is, when it comes to dollars and cents, when it's an expensive item like a car, people still want to touch it. People still want to feel it. So my take on that is really that I don't think physical touch and feel is going away anytime soon, but businesses that can provide a hybrid approach are the ones who will come out as winners, because there is a small population that does not mind doing everything online. And we need to encourage that behavior more and build trust around that. The same people who do hybrid approach that taken care of. But the trick is always around measuring effectiveness, KPIs, and that is an ongoing process, really, for us as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Manisha. I think we all learned something really insightful today. And with that, I think before we move on to the next speaker, we have actually received quite a number of questions for Daryl. Daryl, are you around? Are you available?
I am, but because in the interest of time, do you want to get Charu to present? I'll just reply to them offline now.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if we have time at the end, then I'll take some of them. Yeah.
Great.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay then, no problem. So, all right, last but not least, our last speaker for today is Sharu from Redhill. So Sharu is the Senior Director at Redhill, and she has more than a decade of experience in PR in both agency and in-house. She's a really passionate storyteller, and she loves to incorporate different tools that can amplify communication. So today she's going to take us through a very interesting topic and presentation, a topic specifically around audio, from podcasts to the current hot trend platform of the moment, which is Clubhouse. So without further ado, Sharu, over to you.
Thank you, Soohan. Thank you so much. Just checking, you see my slides all good?
Yes,
excellent.
Working perfectly.
Perfect. And the fact that you can hear me is the starting of that whole topic of audio, because that's my platform of choice today, in addition to, of course, having my slides. But I'm actually going to be depending a lot on my own voice to convey the session today. And I thought it was just kind of reflective of the topic that I'm going to talk about as well. So why did I choose topic, audio as my topic? And the fact that I think in my bio that Soohan introduced me, we talked about how I'm a passionate storyteller. it goes together. Storytelling is a key tenet of what we do as communications professionals, as PR professionals. We tell the stories of our brands, of our people, of our products, our services. It goes from across B2B, B2C. So storytelling being that important, we need to see what are the different platforms that we can use to really amplify those stories. And why do we want to amplify them is because we want to reach the right people. So as the other speakers have talked about, the importance of being targeted, of reaching the right audience for the type of topic that you're actually discussing, and the type of service that you're providing as well. And audio has served as a key tool to storytelling for a long time. It has stood the test of time. Why do I say that? I mean, the very first use of audios can be traced back formally to town criers. If you see the image on the slide, people who used to be sent out to the town squares and to the villages in medieval times and even earlier, where they used to then convey a message, tell the story that the king or the people in charge wanted to tell the wider populations. They served as both the messenger and also then they were the storytellers. So audio was really powerful. And even then, if you look at the fact that if you go beyond town criers, your priests in temples and churches, they served as storytellers using audio. And even before that, if you want to look at less formalized versions of storytelling using audio, our own ancestors, right, our grandparents, our great grandparents, they passed on legacies through storytelling, through their voice. There was no formal writing down to a large extent of recipes or family secrets or anything else that they wanted to pass down through generations. So it was really interesting to see how audio has stood since then and has played such a key role in kind of really communicating and reaching out to people. And also, if you look at the fact that radio has then emerged as one of the most popular and most effective audio technologies. In fact, radio has been a key through the world wars, again, through messages and storytelling. And today, Queen Elizabeth, who is one of the longest running monarchs, she still gives radio broadcasts on special occasions. So the invention of this technology, it has stood and kind of remained popular through even like TV. Television has come through since then. We've had online, so many different things have happened. So why is audio so important, and why has it remained a key tool of communication? Firstly, audio humanizes communications. I mean, a lot of us, when we speak to the people that we want to reach out to as audiences, especially as B2B brands, many times they just see an entity, they see a name. It might be a little bit cold, and then a lot of the communications is being done to other companies. So again, it's just a company to company kind of a engagement. You don't really have a lot of human emotional bonding that happens through the kind of engagement we would have generally. But audio comes in to humanize that. And why is that so important? It's because it allows us to actually hear a voice, hear a person, a human, and then to kind of actually start creating a bond, right? You hear the voice, you think, hey, I can trust this voice, I can believe what they're saying. I mean, look at radio DJs. They use their voice for that exact purpose, right? We listen to them day in, day out on our drives into work. We want to listen to them say what they have to say, whether it's about the latest news that's happening or even interviewing people. It's really just a very lovely way to have a human connection. So even if it's a B2B part of a conversation, that it's not just a company X is speaking about this, it's more about a person is speaking on behalf of company X and then kind of creating that emotional connection with people, which makes it so much nicer. And trust always is a key part, a key thing that we always want to develop as we do the work that we do with our communications there. Secondly, right now, audio has kind of moved to, let's say, podcast, to Clubhouse, to radio, right? There's so many different versions of audio. Like I said, right now, I'm using my voice to communicate to everyone as well. So it literally brings the person, the brand, the company to your home, right? So right now, a lot of you who are working from home, you're listening to me as you sit about, perhaps having your coffee, having a breakfast, or doing anything else that you might be doing. But this technology of audio has allowed me to speak to you in a very non-intrusive manner. When you're, like I said, when you're driving on roads, even when you're going for that lockdown run, which a lot of us kind of got into as we were faced with nothing else to do, we brought along with us the only thing that we could, which was our headphones, and we listened to podcasts. We listened to now Clubhouse. So it's so much easier, less barrier to entry, where people are really engaged. They're listening to you very attentively, what you have to say. You get a very captive audience with very minimal effort on the listener to tune in to what the conversation is, to what that message is being conveyed. So it's just really easy to consume the information that audio allows you to kind of bring through. Now, next one, kind of an extension to the previous point, audio does not require expensive equipment. Like I said, radio has stood the test of time. Even today, it's still so popular, especially in this part of the world where you can find radios in the most rural of areas, and you don't even need complex connections. Even if there's no mobile connection or there's no internet connection, there tends to be a network that allows them to connect to the radio. So it's a very simple yet powerful tool for the reasons I mentioned as well previously, for people to actually connect with a lot of different types of communities and actually cut across society in reaching out to them. And it really gives a very simple and powerful way to engage them. Now, the other thing is about mobile phone access, right? So when you look at things like podcasts and Clubhouse, that goes back to the fact that you need an internet connection. Again, speaking about Southeast Asia and Asia, a huge population actually has a mobile phone connection. They might not have television, they might not have access to newspapers, but they would have a very basic functioning mobile that allows them to connect to very simple online functions. So it's not just about kind of limiting it to people who have fancy equipment. And it's not only just about podcasts and Clubhouse, even things like YouTube or Instagram now with their reels and with YouTube videos. Like, there's so many different ways to really reach out to these people. And I mean, there's light versions of channels such as YouTube where you don't need a lot of bandwidth to actually access that, and it could be an audio only kind of a content that is then being consumed as well. So again, the audience that you can reach through audio is really that much bigger, and again, as I said, it's captive, and it's really something that builds that trust and the connection through people as well. Now, the next point is really important because audio, it cuts through the video fatigue that a lot of us have had over the years, right? I mean, we're always connected to our laptops, always connected to our mobile phones, our iPads. In some form or the other, we're always looking at a screen. And if anything, last year, because of COVID-19, if we've even more dependence and kind of we have to be connected to a screen at all times. I mean, right now, most of us would be using a screen somehow to attend this session. But I also know, again, from personal experience, that a lot of us might just be listening in, but not actually looking at the video for many reasons. And one of them is that fatigue that we feel from always staring at a screen. So again, if you just have a very clean, clear, powerful audio file that is being disseminated, distributed through whichever channel, it allows you to actually engage that audience who you might lose otherwise. So they're not looking at the video you've put out, they're not going to your website to look at anything, because again, like I said, they just don't want to be seeing another screen that they have to stare at to get that information that we're putting out there. So again, it just gives a nice welcome change of staring at your screen and listening to lots of watching a lot of videos. And I feel like this is my favorite reason for why audio is amazing, because humans are lazy. I mean, let's not deny that we are a very lazy bunch of people and species, and we always strive for the easier way of doing things, which is great because it allows us to be very efficient and effective in achieving what we need to do, right? So this extends to communications as well. So if you give someone an audio book of 100 pages versus actually reading that physical book, they will choose the audio version of it. And why is that the case? Because again, like I said, they can multitask if they need to. They could be out for that run, listening to that the book as they do their jog, or they can eat much easier while cooking, listen in. So similarly, it kind of creates those conversations that are so much less intrusive, and also gives less in terms of the commitment to really hear and watch and read all of that at the same time, but just to listen there as well. So it just works in so many different levels from audio perspective. So audio is really key. And a lot of the different discussions we've had today, we talked about, storytelling, we talked about distribution, and all of these things can be traced back to the use of audio, because how do you distribute it? You could have a single audio file, an audio story, and there's so many different platforms that we can go down to. So Clubhouse, as Soohan said, is the flavor of the month. So, why is Clubhouse proving to be so popular? It's because it's allowing the very informal conversations, right? People to just come in, have those discussions very informally. Anyone can listen in, anyone can contribute, anyone can actually participate as well. In a way, it kind of is a throwback to the times where, used in olden times, people used to actually gather in town centers and, town squares to have conversations and to discuss the latest that was happening in the towns and, the families and stuff like that. So Clubhouse has just given a more digital, modern kind of a twist to that. And it just shows that there's still appetite for people to actually talk to another human being. In a way, it's also reflective of the fact that, the other thing that we've become quite starved of is personal human interaction, especially, people in various versions of the lockdowns that we've had through COVID-19, personal interactions, human interactions was something that was really sought after. So in a way, that audio connection gives us that feeling that, hey, I'm actually talking to somebody else, or I'm listening to another human being, another voice there. I'm not alone in the world. So there's so many more different ways in which that audio really cuts through the different types of noise and the total avalanche of information that's out there these days, as we speak and as we communicate all the time. Because the truth is, more and more people are communicating, not just brands, not just companies, but individuals, right? Influencers, people who are industry leaders, key opinion leaders. Everyone is out there putting out content. So how do we make sure that we stand out from that whole depth and sea of information, and how do we create connections? Because at the end of the day, we are humans, so connections really make a huge difference in how we are trying to build that trust. Because once people and brands or people and experts have a trust, then there's a lot higher chance of us actually being able to convince them of what we're trying to convey, of what we're trying to talk about. And it goes back to the different things that we talked about in terms of reputation management, in terms of crisis management. Because when there is inherent goodwill and there is trust already built, if there are some mishaps or slip ups here and there, then people go back to the fact that, hey, I actually trust these people, and if they do say it was a genuine mistake, I will believe them. So audio plays a huge part in kind of creating those trusted relationships and those reputational, like I said, goodwill in which we can leverage when, if ever, do things have go wrong or go south. It just allows us to really create and leverage that for our own benefits and purposes at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm a big fan of audio, and audio is great. I think it's definitely here to stay. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, especially with Clubhouse. Right now, it's only on iOS. So imagine if it goes on Android, where majority of the people in this part of the world use Android. So the moment it goes on Android, it's going to explode even further. So even as technology evolves, the genesis of audio and its role in communications is going to remain as important as it has all these years. And I think it's only perhaps going to increase in importance, as I said, with people getting more and more fatigued with different forms of information literally coming at them at all points and all times as well. So yeah, just a quick one over there, and happy to take on any questions and have another audio conversation.
Thank you, Sharu. I think we're running slightly over, but there are a few questions here. Very quickly, I think there's a question from the floor about, is podcasting now a necessary part of communications? If yes, and why?
I think at the end of the day, it always depends on who you're trying to talk to. and why you're talking about it, right? I mean, just having a podcast for the sake of having a podcast is never going to work for you. Who exactly are you speaking to? If you are a consumer brand and you want to speak to consumers, having a podcast might not be the most effective channel, because who is listening to your podcast? Maybe you need a more mass platform to reach out to. If you're a B2B brand and you have a very niche, clear audience, and the content that you put out is very niche, and you know that you can get that audience who are going to be willing to put out the time to talk and listen to your podcast, then yes, podcast is very effective. So I think with anything in communications, nothing is you have to have this. It's never a template. It's always customized to what your need is. And I think with any channel, you have to remember who you're speaking to, and then does that platform or medium that you are looking at actually then reach that group of people.
So, do you think the audio revolution could be linked to how your brand looks to the consumers as well?
Well, audio revolution will change how the brand sounds to the consumers, not so much looks. But I think the beauty of technology is that even though there's been a lot of podcasts, and initially they started off with audio only, but if you realize now there's actually more and more podcasts have an option of graphic and visual elements as well. So I know, for instance, a lot of, even if you look at radios, right? Let's just take that as an example. A lot of radio shows in Singapore, they actually start doing Facebook Live of the actual interview. So while you're listening to the audio only broadcast on the radio channels or the digital radio stations, you can then go to Facebook or the other social media platforms and watch it. So in a way, it's kind of giving you that flexibility that if you did want to go audio only, you can do that. But if you are a consumer brand, again, is your brand a very visual brand? Is it a product that's clothing? I mean, you can't have a consumer clothing brand and just be audio. That's going to alienate a lot of your audience. And I think, as Manisha said, the touch and feel of certain products is so important. So again, go back to the point, is that what you need? If it is, then sure, go for it. I mean, if you have a drink, you are, something that doesn't rely so much on touch, feel, or just the visual of your products, then of course audio is amazing. It can really push it out there. If not, go for a hybrid approach, right? And if people want to listen to it only, they can. If they don't want to, they can look at the video as well. So it's a bit of both, but yeah, definitely can be utilized for that as well.
Cool. And we have another question about asking what's the best way or ways to enter into the world of audio and audio branding? I guess from the point of how do you plan and what's the strategy to approach it if you're new to this?
Yeah. So with everything in communications, you need to have a very clear plan and a strategy. Don't just jump into it without prepping for it. Research into which channel, which platform works for your brand, for the purpose that you have. So as I said, there's so many different mediums of audio as well, right? Do you want to go down the Clubhouse route, which is open to anyone, very low entries or barriers of entry, sorry, or do you want to go down a formal podcast that you own, or do you want to go down to partnering with another media that has podcasting capabilities in which you then just use what they already have as a setup and get onto it? You have those options, and you need to kind of come up with a calendar or a content strategy, right? What is it you want to talk about? Because there needs to be consistency. You can't just do a podcast one day and then that's it for the rest of your life. You're never doing it ever again, or never ever using it. That consistency of content, of discussion topics. Do you want to have a particular theme that you're trying to push out for every month? How often are they going to hear you? So start creating all of that. And once you have it and you've identified how you want to execute it, then either find a partner. Do you have the necessary technical capabilities in-house if you are going down, let's say, doing your own podcast route? If you don't, then find a vendor. So the different things to do, but I think the most important thing is identifying why you want to do it, who you want to speak to, and then with that, what are the topics you want to talk about, how often you want to do it, and just create a very simple and clear strategy, and then go to town.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I think we have all the questions from the floor. I guess on the topic of Clubhouse, I guess if anyone is keen or want to have an invite, you can approach Sharu. Or you can even ask me on LinkedIn. I have a couple of invites to give away as well.
The irony is that I actually don't have Clubhouse because I'm on Android. But but I actually do work with a couple of clients who have gone on Clubhouse, and it's been really interesting and very fun to have those open conversations with really interesting personalities that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. I mean, Elon Musk just jumping onto Clubhouse. I mean, you don't really get that opportunity sitting at home and or walking down the street. So yeah.
Cool. All right. So so today we have seen many different tech disruptions across the non-traditional channels like Reddit, Discord, Telegram, to using data and AI in our work as well. And not to forget, Sharu just took us through how audio can play a very important strategy in terms of how we communicate. And also we learned from Manisha about how you can actually sell a car through online and through a hybrid model. So I hope everyone enjoys the presentation today. I've learned quite a lot today. I'd like to take the chance to thank all the speakers for the time and all the attendees to attend this session. And I guess with that, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us. And if you would like to connect us on LinkedIn, feel free to join us, look for us. And that, yeah. Thank you everyone for your time. Have a good day and a week ahead.
Everyone. Thanks, Soohan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.
See you guys.